The following experience was originally shared through an email sent to one of my favorite creators, Ashley Inc. You may already know her. And today I'm going to recount it exactly as it was described just for you guys. You can let yourself fully immerse in the story while our creators' gameplay runs in the background. Let's begin. Lee was driving to Chicago to visit her boyfriend. It was a long haul. Around 2:30 in the morning, she was somewhere between Louisville and Indianapolis, where she realized she was starving and low on gas. So she pulled off the interstate and stopped at a truck stop. She filled her tank, then went inside because there was one of those old school diners attached, the kind with the long counter, swivel stools, a grill behind it, booths along the wall. She asked to be seated. The waitress looked at her and said, "We're cleaning the booths right now. Would you mind sitting at the counter? I'll put you on this side though. The guy on the other side is creepy." The counter wasn't big, maybe 3 seats between her and him. She tried not to stare. She ordered her food and just kind of zoned out. This was the 90s. We didn't have phones to distract us, so she was just sitting there with the menu when she heard him ask her something. That was the first time she really looked at him. She asked him to repeat himself, and when she did, she realized something was off. His skin didn't fit right. She didn't mean it cruelly. The closest comparison she could make was someone who had excess skin before surgery, loose, hanging in ways that didn't quite align with the frame underneath. He was very thin, but there was all the slack skin. It was jarring. She tried not to react. She didn't want to be rude. She said, "I'm sorry, what did you say?" And he asked, "Where are you coming from in this time of night?" His accent was strange, not British, not American, not anything she could place. Looking back, the only word she has for it is robotic, like an AI voice before AI voices existed. But at the time, she thought maybe he had some kind of voice box, like he'd had throat surgery. She wasn't exactly creeped out. She just assumed he had medical issues she didn't understand. "I'm going to visit my boyfriend," she told him. The waitress brought her food. As she set it down, the man looked at her and asked, "Bathroom? Where is?" The words were out of order. She pointed down the hall. He got up, and when he walked away, Lee noticed something else. His movement. It looked like it required effort. His gait was just wrong, like he was operating machinery he wasn't fully calibrated to. The waitress and Lee both watched him disappear down the hall. The waitress leaned towards Lee and said quietly, "There's something wrong with this man." And Lee almost said, "I don't think that's a human." Ashley had to stop herself from saying it out loud. She had never in her life looked at someone and thought that before, but the feeling was immediate, deep, instinctual, an uncanny valley reaction she didn't have language for at the time. He came back and sat closer to her. The waitress noticed. She looked at him. Then at Lee, "I have some cleaning to do in the back," she said, "but I'll be out here to check on you in 5 minutes." Then she disappeared. Now it was just the two of them. Lee figured she had to finish her food anyway. He was already talking to her. She might as well be polite. He started asking her all kinds of questions about herself, where she was from, what she did, where she was going. She answered. Finally she said, "You've asked me a lot about me. What about you? What's your deal?" He said very calmly, No. We're just here to observe." That's when she realized he wasn't eating, not drinking, just sitting there. "Observe what?" she asked. "Who's we?" He smiled, like he'd been caught in something amusing. "I travel a lot," he said. "We come here for about 100 years at a time. We change bodies as we need." He seemed faintly amused. She looked at him and said, "Yeah, your suit doesn't fit very well." Without laughing, he replied, "It's new." She asked, "Are you supposed to be telling me this?" He said, "We can see who can be trusted." The whole thing felt half like a joke, half like something else. She couldn't tell which. She finished her meal. The waitress came back. Nothing dramatic happened. He just repeated in different ways that they were here and they were watching us. Lee paid and stood up to leave. "Goodbye," she said. He looked at her and said, "You'll see me again, but I'll be in a different suit." she left. Okay, well, how will I know it's you? He paused. Do you have a favorite quote? He asked. If I see you again, I'll say it to you. She thought for a second and picked something from Shakespeare that felt fitting in the moment. What a piece of work, man. He didn't laugh. He just smiled and said, okay then. She left. The rest of the drive, she just thought it was a funny, bizarre interaction. Something to tell at parties. 11 years went by. Lee was living in Korea, teaching English, and it had been years since that first exchange happened. Although she had thought it was very strange at the time, she didn't really expect to ever encounter that person or that non-human entity again. One night, she was sitting alone at a bar, having a drink after work, when someone slid onto the stool beside her, looked her in the face, and recited the quote without saying anything else. She looked at this person, and even though they did not look like the being she had met years ago at the diner, a strange sense of familiarity washed over her, and all her memories from that night came back flooding. This time, the skin was not ill-fitting. It looked like a completely normal person. She started trying to figure out if this was really the same being. She felt an energetic sensation of familiarity, like she somehow knew this person. She didn't say anything. She just stared. The being finally said, "Do you remember me?" Lee said yes. The being said, "I can't stay long tonight, but will you meet me tomorrow?" Lee agreed, and they arranged for her to show them around the town the next day. When they met again, the being told her that they had connected with her because she was open, trustworthy, and capable of hearing things that others could not. To illustrate, they pointed at a random person and said, that person would be completely freaked out if he knew what you know. Lee began feeling more comfortable, even though she still couldn't believe what she was hearing and knew this was not physically the same person she had met at the diner. Yet, the being seemed to remember everything about this conversation. She started asking questions. "How long have you been here?" she asked. The being told her that when they first met, they had been very new to the planet. Lee realized that was probably why the skin suit had looked so strange the first time. Now the being appeared to have a much better grasp of looking human. She asked where the suits came from, whether they used people who were dead or people no one would recognize. The being simply replied that the answer was complicated and that they were not really at liberty to explain. Lee decided she probably didn't want to know anyway. The first time she had asked where they were from, the being only said not from here, but this time the answer was much longer, filled with complex scientific explanation and mathematical formulas she couldn't even begin to understand. So she simplified the question. "How did you get here?" The being answered, "Technology." She asked if it was like a wormhole. The being replied that it was similar, but not really. Lee then asked if their species liked humans. The being answered, "I don't know. I found you very frustrating sometimes." They walked and talked for several hours. The being was fascinated by Korea and everything Lee showed them. Then, just abruptly as before, they left without much of a goodbye. Years later, while Lee was working in Australia, she saw the being again. They both seemed surprised. The being simply said, "Not now." The next time she encountered them was in Algeria. This time the being appeared in female form, in a professional setting where the being held a very high position within the organization they were working with. The woman approached Lee briefly and whispered the quote, "They couldn't talk," and whispered the quote. "They couldn't talk further because of the circumstances." Lee still had no idea how the being had ended up there. She would have loved to ask more questions, but their encounters never followed any schedule. There was no pattern, no anniversary, no warning. Every meeting happened in a completely random setting, and every time she saw them, she felt both thrilled and deeply unsettled that they were still here somewhere among us, quietly observing. And that's all Lee had for us. I absolutely love these kind of stories, strange encounters that make you question what kind of world we actually live in. I plan to regularly share experiences like these under my series, real uncanny experience. If you live through something you can't quite explain, you can send me your story at candyladycontact@gmail.com. The email is showing on the screen right now. I would love to hear what kind of crazy stories are out there that you guys are keeping for yourselves right now. Also, if you've enjoyed this video, leave me a little comment, a like, and of course subscribe to my channel. Thank you so much for listening, loves. Stay weird.